Everybody, welcome to another episode of Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and joining us today is Gary Quesenberry. How are you, sir?
Hey, good, Jason. How are you? It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Avid listeners will remember Gary from his first appearance on the show when he was talking about his books, Spotting Danger Before It Spots You and Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Kids, two books that apply his extensive experience with the Federal Marshal Service to teaching situational awareness to families. And tomorrow, his next book, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Teens, drops along with several exciting collections. So let's just start there real quick. What's happening tomorrow with your book series?
All right. So April the 1st is a big day for us because not only is the third book in what I call the Heads Up series going to drop, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Teens, but we're also going to be releasing hardcover editions of each book along with the audio books for each book. People have been asking for that for a very long time, the audio books. So we're pretty excited to get that released. And I read them all myself, so I apologize if my accent gets in the way of anyone's understanding, but that's what they wanted. So we're really looking forward to it. And then another thing that's going to be releasing, I'm not sure if that's going to be tomorrow with everything else. It depends on, where they're at in the editing process, but the DVD series. So there's going to be like a 15 to 30 minute DVD that you can order to go along with each book, where it's just me kind of, giving you some scenarios and elaborating on some of the things in the book. So, I'm a firm believer in, everybody learns different ways. So I want to make sure that these books are out there in every format possible to help people absorb as much of the information as they possibly can.
Fantastic. And this next book is, as you said, is for parents of teenagers.
Yes.
And before we kind of get into the details of that, this entire series is about situational awareness, which is kind of it's got a tactical vibe to it. It's what operators say to mean paying attention, only a little more than that. And so could we go ahead and start there? What is situational awareness for folks who haven't encountered that term before?
Okay, well, to me, and this is the way I define situational awareness in the books, is situational awareness is nothing more than your ability to identify and interpret environmental cues for the purposes of predicting the actions of others. So we've all seen it, if you're in an airport or if you're driving in traffic, you're familiar with your environment enough to know that, okay, this person's looking at their cell phone, they're not paying attention to anything else, they're walking down a sidewalk, they're walking right up to this, barricade, and they're either going to snap out of it and, walk around it and take their attention away from their cell phone, or they're going to stay focused, locked on that cell phone, and they're just going to go ass over tea kettle there, in front of everybody. So that's what situational awareness is to be able to take those environmental indicators that we're being fed constantly and predict what's going to happen. Now, the trick with situational awareness when it comes to predatory violence is the sooner you can see something happening or something you can predict that something is about to happen based on what information your environment's giving you, the more time and space you have to protect yourself from it. And you and I both know the best way to do that 100% of the time, ensure your own safety, is just to avoid it altogether. So this becomes particularly important when you're with your family. And it's particularly important to someone like a teenager who may not necessarily be that comfortable with their own independence. And they're seeking that out, around the age, 15 up to, 14, 15, 16, 17. But the more tools that we can give them to help them kind of take more charge of their own situational awareness, the better off we'll feel as parents and the better off they'll be when they're out running around in public.
That's one of the things I really enjoyed about the book. I was fortunate enough to get an advance copy for review, and a lot of advice about raising teens and keeping teens safe seems to be about restricting the teens, about setting up heavy duty fences here, there, and the other place to keep them off the parts of the internet you don't want them to do, keep them from going to this party or keep them from doing that. But the attitude in this book seems very much like, no, what we need to do is we need to teach them these skills so that they can go have the freedom that they need to develop into adults who can make decisions.
Right. Exactly. And, that's my wife and I, we've raised 3 kids, and those teenage years, as any parent of a teenager knows, they are the most trying, and you never know, what's going to happen, because your kids are out there. That parental oversight that we've been so used to having in place starts to feel more oppressive to a teenager. So now you're more like a dictator as opposed to someone who's really just looking out for their best interest. So you have to work within those boundaries. You have to understand how they feel about that parental oversight. And there's ways that you can talk to your teen and things that you can do with your teen to at least give them the tools they need, so that they're more situationally aware and they can recognize problems before they happen. And hopefully, like if you read the second book, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Kids, that's for like 4 to 12-year-olds. And what you're doing is you're playing these little games and you're doing these little exercises with your children. And they don't even know that they're learning about situational awareness. But the things that we do in book 2 is just keeping them engaged with their environment and teaching them how to read different things and how to communicate effectively with strangers if they need to, so that they can get their point across, whether that's, get away from me, I don't know you, or, hey, I need some help with something, how to identify the people that could possibly help you in certain situations and stuff like that. But, as they become teenagers, those adult, figures start to kind of drift off a little bit in the distance, and they want to be left on their own. You can do that, and there still has to be boundaries in place. But, in my book, I talk about how you set those boundaries. And I kind of took a firearms instructor perspective on it, and I came up with the 4 cardinal well, not firearms rules, but 4 cardinal rules in our home. These are rules you cannot break. And then these are the left and right limits. As long as you stay within those left and right limits, we'll allow you your freedom. But if at any point we see you doing something unsafe or something that could jeopardize your safety or the safety of your friends, then we will reinstate our parental oversight, step in and take charge of the situation. So there's just little things like that I think, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a parenting expert. You know what I mean? We struggle with our teens like any other parent does. And a lot of the things I write about, I write in hindsight, like, okay, this is a mistake. We shouldn't have done it this way. This would have been better. And luckily by the time it got to my youngest daughter, she pretty much had smooth sailing, because by that time we had teenagers nailed down. You know what I mean? Like we understood what it was. We understood how to react to certain situations, and it was just easier. And I try to relay that information in the books as much as I can.
And, also as someone with multiple kids myself, there's something about with that last one. We're just too tired to freak out the way we did with the first 2.
I didn't want to say that, but yeah, that's definitely a factor in the whole thing.
Yeah. Hold on just one second. My computer started making noises at me, but I told it to be quiet. It really does blend in with the best description I've ever heard of that transition to parenting kids to parenting teens is you have to move from parenting from a position of authority to a position of parenting from a position of influence.
Yes.
And it's a difficult balance to strike, even if you've had a couple other kids, because each kid needs it to happen at a different pace and at a different time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's no different, than when your children are little and that, okay, the fireplace is hot. Don't touch the fireplace. And inevitably, they're going to test it. They're going to try it. And they learn the hard way. Okay, yeah, that dad was right. That is pretty hot. So, and it's the same thing with teenagers. But unfortunately, some of the situations that teenagers can get themselves into are a little more drastic than, putting their hand on a hot stove or something. Because now you're looking at giving them the independence they need to pursue themselves, find out who they are. And they're driving and they're dating and they're hanging out with friends. And you may not necessarily know exactly who these people are, but it's a tough position to be in as a parent. But hopefully some of the information, and it's not just my book, it's any parenting book, somebody, like us, just coming into parenthood and you're trying to figure this out as you go along. You're not exactly an expert in it, but we have skill sets in other areas, I think, that we found applicable to raising teenagers in terms of their safety, so it's there's a lot of good information in there, I think, and hopefully people get the best out of it.
I certainly found it to be so. I'd like to go back to your left and right limits. If you could talk a little bit about more about what that is, because it was a really interesting framework to put giving kids more space.
Right. So you've been around firearms and things like that before. So, you've got the 4 cardinal firearms rules when it comes to safety. Never put your finger on the trigger, never point your firearm at anything you don't intend to shoot, know your backstop and beyond, so forth and so on. Right. And so with parenting, what I did in the book was, and what we did with our children, is we came up with certain rules, and these are rules that you do not break. And you're not going to drive with a bunch of friends in the car, that we had a limit on the amount of people they could have in their car. They're not going to be on the road after a certain amount of time, just certain things like that. And there don't have to be 4 of them. You can have 2, you can have 20. It's up to you as a parent, what type of rules you want to set. And then the left and right limits were, okay, we understand that you're becoming an individual and you want to try to kind of explore that and find out who you are, and that you're going to be going through some changes, and we'll be as understanding of that as we can be as parents. That's the left limit. The right limit was, we want to talk about things, but at any point, if we see you doing something that can endanger you or endanger someone else, we are going to step in, and that's left up to us as parents. It's not for you to say what's dangerous and what isn't. That's up to us. And, the most important part when it comes to the teenager thing is the conversation that you have about it, because as well as I do, every teenager, when you start going down the do as I say and not as I do route, they're just flipping off instantly. You just lost them. So there is no communication. There's a lot of you talking and a lot of them nodding their head, but there's not a lot of real communication. So that's the key to the whole thing when it comes to teenagers. Now, hopefully you started this whole process when they were younger and you're building up to it and they understand the importance right up front. But, it's a discussion that has to take place. You can't just turn a blind eye to the fact that there are bad people in the world. And, some of them are out there to target you specifically as a teenager. Teenage girls specifically are the most targeted segment in the American population. So it's really important for them to understand some of the concepts about predatory violence, predatory behaviors, what to look for in people in terms of grooming and coercion and things like that. So those are the topics that I touch on. As with every book, I always go through kind of the nuts and bolts pieces of situational awareness as briefly as I can, because I don't want it to be too repetitive. That's what the first book is about. So we cover things like the OODA loop and Cooper's colors and those type things, reactionary gaps, and your options in terms of avoidance and communication, de-escalation, and that type thing. But it's all geared towards teenagers. This is a book that you can pick up as a parent and read and talk to your teenager about, or it's a book that you can just hand to your teenager and say, hey, we want you to read this. We think, or the whole family could benefit from it. So.
Now, there's an interesting thing about awareness when it comes to teens, because I know that in my experience, my own teenage life, I have one son who's made it through his teenage years, another who's just entering it. Not exactly looking forward to that, but at the same time, I'm looking forward to it.
Sure.
And my own, my friends and my friends' kids, where there's situational awareness that we often think of, which is spotting the bad guy before they make the approach, spotting the change in the timbre of the crowd at the bar, so we know to leave now before the balloon goes up.
Yep.
But teenagers and early 20s, young adults, that danger often is more of a frog boiling kind of thing, where, hey, this is fine. Hey, this is fine. Hey, this is fine. Holy shit, this really isn't fine, and it hasn't been
right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's how teenage girl ends up alone with a guy who intends to assault her, or a teenage boy realizes halfway through a burglary that he's committing burglary.
Right.
That sort of thing does happen to teenagers. And your book addresses some of that. So could you speak a bit to that, about how to raise kids who can spot that before they're already neck deep in it?
Yeah, it's tough for us as parents to point these things out to kids, because it's a lot more complicated now than it was when we were teenagers. And I talk about it in the book, how, given the fact that now kids are so connected, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where when I was in middle school, if I was getting bullied at school, I had a reprieve from that. Like I come home, I put in some Guns N' Roses and, watch some A-Team. The world's good. I have a break from my tormentors. Where now, kids are just constantly on their cell phones, are so concerned with social media and different things, and their tormentors can follow them around. And that's not even, that's just what we know about now as parents. And there's so many more things that just happen every day in terms of technology and how people can take advantage of other people and, just get into other people's lives and make themselves a nuisance in general. So the purpose of this book, is to try to teach teenagers how to disengage from that from time to time. And because we don't have all the answers. I'm 51 years old. When it comes to technology, I still got to have my kids program my remote. You know what I mean? So I don't understand it the way I should. I look into it where I see problems, but 9 times out of 10, that's from a reactionary perspective. I find out about the problem, like you just said, and then I research it and I'm like, okay, how can we apply situational awareness to this? And then I write about it. Where a lot of times teenagers like that, they've been doing that for 10 years. You know what I mean? Like, so, I try to stay on top of things as best I can, but things change so much with teenagers. The best thing that we can do, as parents is give them those nuts and bolts pieces of situational awareness that never change, those standard items that they're going to use for the rest of their life to kind of read how people are treating them, what people are trying to get from them, because 9 times out of 10, you can tell in an interaction if someone's trying to get something from you or not, and teach them how to recognize those things. So, it's like cars, like you take a Tesla, I can look under the hood of a Tesla, right? Do they even have hoods? I don't even know, right? But I don't know what I'm looking at in there. Yeah. But I can tell you how to change a tire. Those are the things I know. The technology around that may change, but the wheels are always going to be wheels. And that's the kind of the way I look at the situational awareness thing. Those nuts and bolts pieces that you use to build that foundation for your children when they're younger, just continues to grow, and it never changes when they become teenagers. The situational awareness piece pretty much stays the same. And you have to give them the knowledge and tools that they need to identify those changes that you may not necessarily be aware of as a parent, like the changes in social media, the changes in technology, and the way people can take advantage of other people. But giving them those tools, those basic skill sets, that's the most important thing you can do as a parent.
And as you say, those are applicable even in these realms that we don't know much about, because a predatory person is going to exhibit certain predatory behaviors. One of the classic ones is if they are asking you to do something that's going to separate you from resources and people who can help you, that is probably a person who doesn't have your best interest in mind.
Exactly.
Right. If they are consistently putting you down, that is somebody who does not have your best interest in mind.
Right. And somebody that's overly nice, you have to be aware of that, because there's a difference between someone just being nice and someone trying to be charming, because someone who's trying to charm you, they're doing that for a reason, where somebody who's just being nice, they could just be a nice person. So you got to teach your kids what those differences are and what to look for when you're having those personal interactions with people, be it at a ball game or a party or whatever, so that when to listen to that intuition, what it's telling you, and how to decipher that information to keep yourself safe.
Absolutely. There was it was Gavin de Becker's book, I think, that blew my mind by reminding us that charm is not an adjective, it's a verb.
Right.
It's not a trait that somebody has, it's something someone is doing because they want something from you.
Right.
And it's really interesting little mental switch to flip.
Yeah, it's an absolute fact. And, I referenced Gavin de Becker because he's kind of the godfather when it comes to this intuition piece of situational awareness. His first book, The Gift of Fear, I think it may have been his first book. It's the first one I was aware of. But, he talks extensively about the role that intuition plays in your personal safety and how to listen to it. So, there's a much bigger mechanism around intuition that can help you to be more situationally aware, little things and tricks and tips and stuff that you can do if you know what to look for in people. So, that when you marry it with that intuition piece and you understand them both equally, then you're way ahead of the game in terms of what you see and what other people see in their environment.
No, that makes good sense. So now, ideally, I would have had a copy of these books the day my kids were born and raised them with those lessons all the way through. But for parents who are picking up your book tomorrow, remember, everybody, it releases on April 1st. Where should a parent who's starting from square one, what would you recommend we do first with, say, a 13 or a 14-year-old?
With a 13 or 14-year-old, it's just communication. You have to know what's going on with your kid's life. Ideally, you know, you're not starting at 13 or 14 years old. You're starting at 3 and 4 years old to play these little games and, you know, do little things with them to keep them engaged with their environment and keep them paying attention to how people act, how they feel about people, and get them used to relaying those feelings back to you. You know, like say they have an interaction with someone at a grocery store, a cashier, and you know how cashiers can be, especially if you have a young child, you know, they're super friendly. But then I start asking your kid questions afterwards, you know, like, so did that person seem happy or did they seem sad? And make them use descriptive words so they learn how to be descriptive in you know, in the unfortunate event they have to be because something bad happened. And then, you know, start asking them questions about themselves. Like, how did you feel talking to that person? Did they make you feel relaxed and comfortable? Were you nervous? You know, you got to start those conversations so that they understand how other people's actions affect them and their feelings. Then, you know, when a kid's 13 or 14 years old and you say, hey, let's start talking a little bit about situational awareness, they've kind of already got a feeling for why that's in place and how it works. Now, if you're just starting from scratch with a 13, 14-year-old, obviously the key is going to be in communication. And that can be difficult for a parent when they're just getting started, you know, on that. Because if you sit down with a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, and you've never spoken to them about this before, and you're like, sit down, we're going to talk about situational awareness. You know, you're going to get a whole lot of eye rolling, and you're going to get them like, okay, is it okay if I'm just going to, you know, send this text real quick, and they'll be on their phone for a couple of hours. But, you know, it's all about the conversation and the communication piece. And you have to know, as a parent, you have to know when you're pushing a little too hard, when to back off, because you have to be able to read your own child's, you know, emotions and their attention span, and they're all different, you know, so you have to just kind of understand where you can insert that conversation and how far you can go with it.
So here's a question. It's something that I encounter a lot when I'm presenting for Save This Family on the blog. Is the biggest form of pushback I get from any parent is this fear that by talking to their kids about danger in the world and how to spot danger, that we're going to frighten them.
Right.
What do you have to say about that? I have a theory, but I'd like to hear it.
Okay. Well, you know, this is a topic that I've been thinking a lot about lately, is the whole fear piece. Yeah. And I write about it in my second book, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Kids, because I'm not a fan of parenting through fear. And I think we talked about this on the last time I was on, how parents will sometimes use fear as a tactic to control their children. You know, if you don't behave, I'm going to have that police officer over there come and arrest you. You know, how many times have you seen that? And now all you're doing is, if that kid's ever in a position where they need a police officer, they're going to be afraid to approach that police officer with a problem. So don't use fear as a tactic to control. And, you know, as they get older, they may not act like it, but there's a lot more out there to be afraid of. So I was just doing a little bit of research. I'm giving a keynote speech down in Florida at the end of February for a group of ladies. And we're talking about situational awareness. And one of the notes I made is, you know, the book of 5 Rings, Miyamoto Musashi, the old samurai, right? He said that fear resides in all things, and the heart of fear is the unexpected. And that resonated with me, because the unexpected is just that. It's the absence of situational awareness. You know, so you can control a lot of fear through situational awareness, because you're not afraid of what lies around the next corner. You know how to take that corner so that you can kind of predict what's going to happen when you're on the other side. That's a very rough analogy, but you understand what I'm saying. So, you know, not teaching or using fear to control kids, you know, is the first big step in it. And then the other big step is just giving them the tools they need, to fight the things that they may be afraid of, because teenagers are in it for the experience. If you tell them they can't do something because it's dangerous, 9 times out of 10, they want to do it because they want that experience. That's how they're going to gain the cool points and the life skills that they need in their mind. That's what they're thinking. So, they're going to seek things out that could be considered dangerous. You don't want them to be afraid of it, but you want them to be smart enough to know, all right, this is stupid. The difference between cool and stupid can sometimes be a fine line, but you got to teach them where that line's at and how to avoid crossing it.
And that actually brings up another really interesting balancing act for tweens and teens, and again, early adults. They need to engage in risky behaviors because that's how we learn not to screw up as adults.
Right.
I can't remember who said it, but I agree with it a lot, that a childhood without at least one broken bone is a wasted childhood. What you learn from breaking your arm sometime in your tween and teen years is usually worth having broken your arm.
Yeah.
And so finding that balance, because we don't want our kids to experience pain, but yet they have to experience a little pain to grow up into fully formed adults. So what are some thoughts that you have on that?
Well, I agree with you 100%, and as a parent, that's incredibly hard to watch, to know that it's going to happen, to see it, about to happen, and then watch them go through that, whether it's a breakup with a boyfriend that you had a bad vibe about in the beginning or whatever it may be. But you have to let them have those life experiences. You can't shelter them from everything, because if you do, you're just going to raise an adult who goes out and does the dumbest stuff, that a teenager would do, because they don't have those experiences and they don't have that learning process in place before they get to that point. So, it's really important to let them experience that, as no matter how hard it is for you as a parent to watch. And my whole point with the books is it becomes a lot easier for you as a parent to watch your kids go out into the world, knowing that you've equipped them with the tools they need to make good decisions. Now, does that mean they're going to make good decisions every time they walk out the front door? Absolutely not. But you as a parent, you've done your part. You've communicated effectively with them. You've given them their boundaries. They understand the rules and they understand the consequences, because that's another important piece. There's got to be consequences to breaking these rules or exceeding the left and right limits, right? And then you turn them loose and you watch how they grow and it's a beautiful thing to watch. In most cases, there's some moments where you just want to turn away, but the whole process is very rewarding. But just being able to take the information that's in the books and the stuff that I learned as a parent and as a federal air marshal, and the hard lessons that we had to learn with my kids at certain points, and putting that in a format where other parents can benefit from it has been very rewarding as well. So hopefully that helps ease some of that pain that some parents have when it comes to turning their kids loose.
Yeah. Just when my oldest was 20, I realized about 5 minutes into the initial argument that I was going to have to let him learn for himself why you don't buy a BMW for $700 on a blue book from a lady in a Walmart parking lot. I was like,
yeah,
okay, this is your mistake to make. You're not going to die, and you're probably going to get good at fixing cars.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of lessons to be learned there.
Yeah. But I like that idea about how if you give them that baseline of awareness skills and trust in themselves, so that they'll be able to spot the danger, and they'll make mistakes, they'll do stupid stuff, but it won't be lethal stupid stuff, right, or massively life-altering stupid stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you've got to be prepared. You've got to be, as a parent, you have to be prepared for some of the life-altering stuff too, because we know we have that perspective. We have the benefit of hindsight as adults, and we know how stupid we were as teenagers. Not saying that teenagers are stupid. They're incredibly intelligent, but they don't have the life experience they need to make sound decisions in certain situations. We'll put it that way. So, it's, they have all the tools and skills that they need to be perfectly capable of getting out there and doing things on their own. You as a parent just have to learn how to reel that control out and then reel it back in when it needs to be.
And what do you recommend for, when you get that? Because that's often very hard to give permission, and then it's very hard to get that genie back in the bottle.
Well, that's, and that I talk about that in the communication piece of the book. When you talk about sitting down with your kid and having those conversations, and it doesn't have to be some eye-rolling, hour-long family meeting. It can just be a casual conversation that you slip in from time to time. But, they have to understand that the reason you've put certain rules in place are because you do have that perspective of hindsight. You've learned from your mistakes, and you don't want to see them repeat some of those. Now, they have to understand that it's okay for them to come with you, with certain things, whether you want to hear it or not. You got to let cooler heads prevail. And one of the rules that we always had in place was, especially once they started driving and they started going to parties and dating and going places with friends, the rule was, because I understand, based on my experience, that things can escalate beyond your control fairly quickly. And you may find yourself in a situation that 5 minutes ago was okay, and now all of a sudden you're not all right with it, and you need to get out of there. So you can give them tools that they need, and I always told my kids, you can call us anytime. We don't want to get phone calls from the police. We want you to call us and say, hey, things went south. I don't want to be here. Can you come get me? And I don't care if they've been drinking or if they've been in a fight or there was some trouble or whatever. I'm going to come snatch them out of there. Right. And I'm going to make sure that they're safe. And we're not going to talk about it while the emotions are heated and my anger is kind of boiling over. We'll wait, a day or two or whatever it takes, but then we're going to talk about it. And they always knew that up front, that it's not going to be something that just blows over. If they get in trouble, it's not just going to blow over. It's going to be addressed. But it's going to be addressed when, like I said, cooler heads can prevail and we can communicate with each other. Because what I always found is, you can't just, we talk about letting out some of that line and then having to reel it back in. You can't treat them like an adult part of the time and then treat them like a 6-year-old part of the time. If you're going to treat them like an adult, then treat them like an adult. If you're going to treat them like a child, treat them like a child. But that whole back and forth piece is what it adds to the confusion, and you don't want that as a parent. You want to be the source of, the source of structure. You don't want to be the reason that they're confused or the reason that they don't understand why this rule is in place or why they have to do some things a certain way. So that communication piece is the most important piece of the whole puzzle when it comes to working with teenagers.
Yeah, you want to be the person who they feel relieved when you walk in the room, not the one where they go, oh shit, when they walk in the room.
There's a couple of times you want that old shit feeling. Under certain circumstances, but like I said, you don't want to have those conversations when you're in the heat of the moment, when everybody's passions are kind of, Dad, it wasn't my fault. Yes, it was. You put yourself there, and I'll admit I can be hot tempered. And I've got 3 redheaded children who can be incredibly hot tempered, and that never worked. So we had to learn to balance that. We learned that together, and my wife was always the one that would have to be like, all right, listen, this is how we're going to have to handle this. But yeah, exactly. And just because my name's on the books, right? My name's on the books. I wrote the books, but my wife had a whole lot to do with the information that's in there because she's the one that was rational enough in some of those moments to come up with, the way the proper way to handle it.
It's good to be married to someone smarter than you.
Absolutely.
Have my own. That you can call me anytime saying, in our family, we call that the bat signal rule.
Okay. Yeah.
My son's was just to ask me if his uncle Matt had gotten here yet. He just texted me that, Matt lives a long way away. He's going to know if Matt's here. So what that was, it would give him a face-saving reason to leave.
Exactly.
So, my uncle's here. My dad's going to be here in 10 minutes. I got to go, guys.
Yeah.
And that kind of allowing them to navigate that in a way that's not,
right.
That lose social capital.
Exactly. And, I mentioned that in the book because it's a currency, they gain those cool points. And then if you lose them, they're gone. You don't get those back easily when you're a teenager. So, you always have to do things like that for them and let them know up front, hey, I understand what this is. And you got to save face, and you can't call your mom and dad every time you get in trouble. So having those little codes and those little things where they can save face, but still pull themselves out of a situation that they're uncomfortable with, that's something that has to be talked about and set up front. And we talk about that in the book as well.
Yeah, and it goes into some good details about how to have that conversation, about how to go into those negotiations, even because it sometimes feels a bit like a negotiation when you're.
Oh, absolutely. And you want it to be, because it's not a conversation otherwise. If I set you down and I say, all right, listen, these are the rules, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, those are the rules, and this is what you're going to do, and this is what I'm going to do if you break them. Well, what if they're not necessarily comfortable with the rules in the first place? They have to feel like they have the ability to voice that. And if they're like, well, Dad, you saying I got to be home at 9:30 every night, my friends, they get to stay out till 10:30, they got to be home by 11, and it still gives you enough time to say, and it's a conversation, it's a negotiation, and somewhere in there is middle ground where you can both walk away feeling like, all right, I gave a little bit of ground, they gave a little bit of ground. That's a mature way to handle things. And if you can get your teenager to that point, then you're making progress. If you can sit down and you can have those conversations and you can come to agreement on something as simple as a rule on curfew, then you're making progress.
And it also models communication with the people you love.
Right.
And they take that with them when they raise their own kids, when they get serious with their first very serious partner, and start talking about things like fidelity and how they're going to handle the finances.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You gotta have those conversations, and teaching them how to do that early is always going to be beneficial to them as they get older.
And another thing about having kind of negotiating those rule sets and consequences, I mean, I'm fairly creative with consequences, but my oldest was downright fiendish. Yeah. He had suggestions for consequences for him screwing up that were way meaner than what I had in mind. Yeah. That's how you can get them in there. They kind of let you know what really motivates them.
Right. And it's funny too, because that was always a tactic when our kids were little. Say my son or my 2 daughters are fighting. Let's just say they get into an altercation in the hallway, right? Picture gets knocked over and broken, whatever. And, you set them down, and I would always ask him, I'll be like, so who started it? And inevitably it's this, right? Both of them started it. So you're like, all right, so, my youngest daughter, Emily, and my oldest daughter, her name's Elda. And I'd be like, Emily, what do you think I should do to Elda? And then she'd be like, oh, and she'd just come down with these, just hammer fisted things, to discipline Elda. And I'd be like, all right, that's what I'm doing to you. Right. And I'm doing it to you. So, you got to teach them early, like, okay, so they're both at fault. They both have to take a little accountability. And that only, and that happens even when they're teenagers. You got to teach. And that's a big thing. Like in the book, I break it down like there's, communication, responsibility, accountability, all these things. Those boxes have to be checked, because if you leave one of them out, the rest of it just kind of falls apart. You can have communication, and that's fine. But if your kids don't take responsibility for their actions, or they don't take accountability for the outcome of their actions, then the communication piece was null and void in the first place. So you have to have those things set up. And, that's what I'll walk you through in the book, is how to have those conversations and what, worked best for us. And what I'm saying worked best for us. And everything that I put in the books isn't just about me and my wife and my family and how we raised our kids. There's a lot of really good information out there. And when I started digging into this and doing some research on communication with teenagers and stuff, there was little nuggets of things in there that I was like, man, why did I not have that 10 years ago? But, so it's in the book, so you have it if you need it. But it's, it's a group effort. It's a group effort. And, I've talked to people like yourself that have written testimonials for books for me and things like that. And we get into these discussions about parenting, and, you voice your concerns about things, and they're like, well, I did this and this is how I handled it. And believe it or not, your own parents are a really good resource for stuff. Yeah, because I remember rolling my eyes at my mom and my dad, and then years later, when I was having these problems with my teenager, my parents would just kind of be like, "Yeah, it's tough, isn't it?" So you did way worse when you were a kid, and let me tell you how we handled it. And somewhere in there, there's those little nuggets of wisdom that you can just. They're like those nuts and bolts pieces of situational awareness. They never change. Doesn't matter if you grew up in the 70s, doesn't matter if you grew up in the 80s or now. Communication, responsibility, accountability, all those things are just as important now as they were when we were kids. And those are the things as parents that you want your kids to have, because if you can put those in place, they got the rest of it licked.
Yeah, I remember telling my dad that I was having trouble getting my teenager to apply himself to his studies. He had to pull over. He was laughing so.
I believe it. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, but then he has some good advice. But
sure. Yeah. I have those conversations with my dad quite a bit.
Yeah. One more question about teens. So with their kids, we often teach them games. We teach them awareness in the form of games, whether it's challenges, kind of role playing, what if games, things like that. And as they get older, I've seen a lot of advice I've applied to my own self about you start to even deputize them into the family safety.
Sure. Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit about that? Because
well, their roles and responsibilities change as they get older. And that, that's one thing that we always wanted our children to feel like, I'm not just watching over you all the time, but you have my back sometimes too. And this is how that works. And in the fourth book that comes out in 2023, The Spotting Danger for Travelers, that's where I take all the books and you kind of put it all together so that you've got this family unit now. You've got parents, you've got younger children, you've got teens. Say everybody's going off on a big family vacation. What's everybody's role? What responsibility does everyone have in terms of personal safety and situational awareness and how that works as a unit? So those things are all covered. When you start getting to the teenage years, I think it's okay to have more open conversations about the actual hazard, where when someone's, say you got a kid who's 6 years old and you're playing games like I Spy and memory and stuff like that to build those cognitive skills they need. And you're working with them on their descriptive language and their social skills and their communication skills, all these different things. Now you can really start putting that stuff into play with the what if games when they're teenagers. So one thing that we always did is like the Westroads Mall shooting. I think that was the one with the Batman movie, if I'm not mistaken, in Colorado. So, you see that happen and it's in the news. And then you set your kids down and you talk about it, because even they have empathy for hopefully, they have empathy for people in situations like that. So, you talk to them, you're like, all right, you go to the movies quite a bit, you and your boyfriend or you and your girlfriend. What would you do if, this happened? How would you react to that? And you start playing those what if games with them. And we would do that when we were in the mall, and we would do it when we were out to dinner. We would play those what if games. And if anything, if it just gets their head out of their cell phone and gets them looking around for a few minutes, that's the whole purpose of it, is to get them engaged with their environment so that they look like a harder target to a potential predator. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. So, just playing those little games and just kind of upping the ante as they get older, giving them the information that they can handle based on their maturity level, and then letting them kind of interact with you in a way where it's kind of a back and forth conversation about how certain situations should be handled, then that's where things change with teenagers. You can be a little more, you can get them way more involved and actually teach them why they're getting involved in it, because they can see the consequences of their decisions at that age, where maybe a 5 and 6 year old doesn't necessarily understand that up front.
That makes good sense. And just kind of slowly escalating their involvement and how you communicate the consequences.
Yeah, and I say this right up front in all of my books. In my very first book, I tell the story about, and I think we talked about it last time I was on, how someone targeted my children when they were in elementary school, my 2 oldest children. And they called the school and they identified themselves as Gary Quesenberry. They said that they worked for the Federal Air Marshal Service. They were getting transferred to another field office. So they were going to show up early, pull the kids out of school, have all their stuff ready. I'll be there to get them. Right. So that wasn't me. I was on an overnight in Baltimore at the time. And my wife just so happened to get to the school early that day to volunteer with my youngest daughter. They made copies for teachers and stuff like that because they were so shorthanded. And this all came to light. And my wife called me. I called my bosses. Everybody got involved. There was a big law enforcement presence. Some of the guys that I work with showed up there to kind of help my wife through things. And nobody ever showed up. We don't know why that happened. You know, we don't know. You know, the first question that the police asked was, is there another parent involved, like a step parent? We're like, no. You know, we've been married to each other forever, and these are our children. There are no step parents. Well, you know, they're like, well, what do you do for a living? And I told them, they're like, oh, you think it could be like you're being targeted because of your job? And at the time, that was a very distinct possibility. So we never know why it happened, but it happened. And it changed the way we lived, you know, in terms of situational awareness. And it also changed the way we communicated with our children. And they saw that. They saw me and their mother upset because of this thing that happened. We explained to them what happened. And because of that, we had immediate buy-in from our young children. And not everybody has that. And I don't wish that on anybody. But that made it a little easier for us as they got older to have those difficult conversations, because they understood that, okay, Daddy has this job for a living that could put us in danger potentially, and we need to be aware of these things to keep ourselves safe. It doesn't matter if you're a federal air marshal or if you're a plumber. You know, there are still people out there who would target your children for whatever reason. And they need to understand that, but you have to communicate it to them in a way that's not going to instill that necessary fear, like we were talking about earlier. So getting that buy-in from them is important. You have to find something that they can connect with, whether it's a story about bullying or a school shooting or something that happened in a mall. You know, just find something that they can associate with their own personal safety and their personal habits. Maybe they go to the movies all the time and they hear about this. That's a good opportunity for you as a parent to have this difficult conversation about how they would react. And then you can start giving them these tips and stuff that I outline in the book, and they'll understand, I think, a little better and a little more as to why you would want to put these rules in place.
You know, have that a more internal motivation instead of, well, mom and dad like it and I like mom and dad. So
exactly. If they don't have a connection to it, then it's harder for them to pay attention. So as soon as you see something that they have a connection to, then that's where, you know, there's the opportunity there to have that engaging conversation that, you know, can make an impact with them. So you have to look, as a parent, you have to be on the lookout for those opportunities. And they're not always easy conversations to have, but it's your responsibility as an adult to make sure that your children have all the tools they need before you just start turning them loose and expect them to make the right decisions.
Yeah. You know, I wanted to kind of circle back to one small detail from that anecdote, which is that your wife was volunteering at the school that day.
Yes.
And I'm actually working on an article right now, haven't shopped it to a home, but it's the 10 least sexy things you can do to keep your family safe. And that's the top of the list. Volunteer at your school. You get to know the layout, you get to know the staff gets to know you, the office staff is more invested in your kid. It's not just good for the community in general, because schools need all the help they can get. It's directly helpful to the safety of your family.
Absolutely. I talk about it extensively in the book, you know, and I made these mistakes when I was a parent, you know, especially with my first kid. God bless him. He's a good kid, you know, but man, he really went through some hard times with me learning how to be a parent. So, you know, by the time I got to my youngest daughter, smooth sailing pretty much, you know, but he was the one that had to break that ground for everybody. So, you know, one of the things I talk about is how many parents, when your kid at the beginning of the year comes home with their, you know, their school kind of, you know, usually they give them a little book, you know, it's a little pamphlet about, you know, the school and numbers to call in case of emergencies. And if there's an issue, you know, you do this. But you read through those books and there's a lot of information in there about some schools, not all, but about like their response to school shootings. you know, if they teach the Alice program or things like that at their school. So, you know, if you don't have those resources at hand, it's important for you to go to the school from time to time and talk with someone, whether it be a vice principal or a counselor or whatever, and just ask them about these plans that they have in place. If there's a school shooting tomorrow, you know, how do I reconnect with my child? How will that happen? Like, what are the steps that keeps them safe and then gets them reunited with me? And a lot of parents can't answer that question. They don't know how their children's school works in an event like that. So, you know, in the event something were to happen, God forbid, everybody needs to be working towards the same end goal. And the only way for us to do that as parents is to make sure that we're involved and that we know what's supposed to happen so that we can communicate that to our children as well. A lot of times our kids will know these things, but not communicate them to us, you know, or vice versa. So we've got to make sure that everybody's on the same sheet of music when it comes to these emergency responses. So, you know, that, and again, it just falls back on that communication piece. It's one of the most important things you can do with your team.
And you spend a lot of time in the book on that for good reason.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Gary, thank you for taking your time to talk to us again. Always good to have you on. You share such good wisdom. And folks, if you're watching this on premiere day for this episode, tomorrow the book goes live, as do the hardbacks of the first 3 books in the series. Hopefully the DVDs. Absolutely go check them out. They're worth every second you spend reading them.
And the audiobooks. A lot of people have been wanting those audiobooks. Yeah.
I every summer when I start doing the landscaping, I develop a crippling audiobook habit.
Right.
So
yeah.
Looking forward to that. All right. Well, thank you again. And thank you everyone for watching us, and stay safe, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Jason.